I'm really delighted to have a special guest here this morning. We had a little bit of snafu in the schedule, so I'm really glad you guys made it. I mean, we were going to do it yesterday, but when you have a guest as busy and in demand as Nadia Calviño, the Minister for Economy and Business of Spain, well, then this is what happens. We're really lucky to have you here, so thank you. As you all probably know, Spain is about to hold parliamentary elections on November 10th. This is the second time in less than a year. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez tried but couldn't find enough support in Parliament to pull together a government, so we've thrown it back to the polls. Europe's fifth largest economy pulled rapidly out of the crisis after 2008. It cleansed its banking system, instituted reforms, did a lot of things to its labor market that many of its neighbors still haven't done in Europe. The past few years have been more complicated, obviously. What was once a de facto two-party democracy has become something a bit more fragmented. Political gridlock is now also a feature of Spanish governance, as it is sadly, or maybe some people aren't so sad about it, in other liberal democracies. So I'm delighted to have you here, Minister Calviño. You're on your way to the IMF and the World Bank, so it would be great if we could just have I think I called this a fireside chat, but there's no fire. New York City regulations will not allow us to do that. But I thought it would be great to sort of go through the economic situation in Spain and Europe. Just a quick, you see her bio here. I'll go over it quickly. She was appointed to the role she's in now by the Sánchez government in 2018, following a distinguished career in the ministry and the European Commission. Her portfolio is extensive. It included work at the Commission in competition, internal market, industry, entrepreneurship, financial stability, financial services and capital markets union policy. And you're also have worked as a professor of economics at Complutense. Did I say that right? Good. And where you also studied economics.
Yes.
So anyway, so let's start with some fresh news. The other day, Spain submitted a budget to the European Union that had a slight tweak to the forecast for growth. It went from, I think, around slightly lower to 2.1% this year, 1.8% next year, and you increased your deficit estimate a bit. What's, that suggests that there's a little bit more cloudy clouds on the horizon for the economy. Nothing extraordinary, but it's worth just sort of getting a sense of how you guys view the Spanish economy, and within that, the European economy.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. We met some months ago, and he gave me this very kind invitation to pass by whenever I was in New York. So I took the opportunity today, and it's indeed a very timely moment to be here. And I'm very glad to be able to share some thoughts with you and also address your questions. Now, the Spanish economy has shown a remarkable resilience in a quite challenging international environment. I think it would be fair to describe it this way. We have been showing strong growth rates in the last years, even in the more fragmented, as you said, political environment in the country. The economy has been performing quite well, significantly better than the other European economies, in particular the Eurozone. And this resilience is leading us to have a quite positive forecast for this year. We expect growth to reach 2.1% in 2019, 1.8% in 2020. This is 1 decimal point lower than what we had foreseen at the beginning of the year. And the revision is mainly due to the fact that our National Statistical Office has done some statistical adjustments to the last 23 years of GDP statistics. So that's the main reason. Obviously, the Spanish economy is very open. We cannot isolate ourselves to the international tensions, in particular trade tensions. We're seeing trade slowing down, the industrial sector is suffering. But the growth pattern is much more stable than in previous expansionary phases, and that leads us to believe, not us, it leads all analysts forecasting, international and national institutes, investors, etc., to see that the prospects are positive also going forward.
And so you mentioned a couple of things. One is the trade tensions in the United States. Now, the U.S. imposing further tariffs on imports from the European Union, largely due to this Airbus-Boeing spat. I'm just curious how that might affect Spain specifically, and what you might be discussing with your counterparts in Washington later this week on that front.
Well, a general reflection first. Spain is fully aligned with the European approach to international trade. You know, we really believe in rules-based international trade as a source of prosperity. The system, the multilateral system we have built after the Second World War has served us well. It has brought prosperity and growth and welfare to citizens around the world, and we think that this should be the way forward, to have a constructive attitude and not conflict. Actually, I think that, I mean, the IMF latest forecasts are actually showing that the long period of uncertainty that has opened in the last couple of years is actually already having a negative impact on growth, and therefore it is, in a way, a risk materializing, just the fact that there's this uncertainty. So we think that it would be ideal to put things on a constructive track. In particular, we do not consider it fair or appropriate to threat to impose tariffs on certain products as a reaction to a WTO judgment in the Airbus case. First, because we are awaiting a similar symmetrical, I would say, judgment on the Boeing state aid case. But secondly, because we also find it unfair, particularly when the US authorities have announced that their tariffs would be risen on wine, olive oil, and olives, which, you know, it will come as no surprise, happen to be important products for Spain. Yeah. So there has been some excitement in the agro-food sector in our country, which obviously is not a very significant part in terms of GDP, but in terms of the social importance it is. And the Spanish government has been very proactive, immediately talking to the EU authorities in order for them to put these discussions with the US authorities on track. As you know, trade negotiations are exclusive competence of the EU. Right. And also to see what kind of instruments we could have to support farmers, to support the agro-food industry so that they do not suffer from these threats, which, and I'll close with this, I hope will not actually materialize at the end of the day.
Good luck with that in Washington this week. The other question I guess I had about the economy was there was this Thomas Cook travel agency failure in the UK, and it seemed to be that there was quite a bit of a link with Spain. Is that a concern at all for the economy? And
well, again, we're in a relatively similar situation. The Thomas Cook failure was in a way a pre-Brexit kind of exercise, because some have linked this to actually part of the impact on the British economy derived from Brexit. Well, it does have an impact, in particular in the Canary Islands, because this is the Canary Islands depend largely on tourism, and the winter season is the high season. You know, you should all go there. Actually, I would strongly encourage you to go during the winter season, because it's absolutely wonderful. But obviously, they depended very heavily on the Thomas Cook Group. Now, fortunately, some things seem to be put on track. Part of the group has not failed, the part which is linked to German and North European tourists, so it's only the British that will be affected. And we're looking for investors and other competitors to take over the plane slots, the hotel rooms, in order for the impact to be minimum. And we're also looking for support for those hotel owners and other businesses in the sector, in the tourism sector, to provide them with liquidity so that they can bridge this first transition. So I do hope the impact at the end of the day will not be very strong, but of course it came as a blow in the wrong moment of the year.
Sure, sure. You mentioned Brexit. Let's talk a little bit. I don't want to dwell too much on it, but by the end of this conversation, there may be another new development for all we know. But I mean, how are you positioning yourselves vis-a-vis Brexit? What is, I mean, this is it's, as some people call it, a slow-moving train wreck or that kind of thing. Do you need something? Oh yeah. Let me get you that.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
But you know, how do you view the current situation in London, and you know, how are you kind of handicapping the potential for a, you know, hard Brexit versus a negotiated settlement?
Well, Spain has, from the beginning, very strongly supported a negotiated way out for the UK. We very much regret that this is the track that they're on. But once we're on this track, we need to minimize damage. So we have very strongly supported a constructive attitude to try to find a negotiated way out. The last news we have are a bit more optimistic than a couple of weeks ago. Let's hope that this brings to the right deal. This would be first best in the current circumstances. We need to avoid a hard Brexit. I think that this would cause severe damage to the UK economy, and of course it would not be good for any of the other European economies. So now what we are doing is, as any wise person would do, hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. So in the last months, we have taken a number of measures to minimize the possible disruption. In particular, again, agro-food exports, which are important to the UK. If there would be trucks lining up in Calais to cross over to the island, etc. Also to minimize the impact on the tourism sector. We have hundreds of thousands of British citizens living in Spain and hundreds of thousands of Spanish citizens living in the UK. So we have also adopted emergency legislation to ensure that there is continuity there and in terms of access to health systems, etc. So we have done the utmost from the point of view of the government and with the regional autonomies, the regional governments, the sectors, the businesses, to prepare. But of course, we have to try, until the end that this is not the way out, because I think that actually it's very difficult to foresee what could be the impact of such a situation. I think I cannot see how any authority would actually have sufficient information to get it right. It's a big uncertainty.
Yeah, and there are other points to that. I mean, you saw the Scottish National SNP party leader today. It suggested that Scotland would have a referendum. You, of course, have had in Spain the Catalonia question. Earlier this week, we had the sentences that were meted out to a number of the leaders of the Catalonian secessionist movement. It's a very strong views on both sides of this, whether they were too harsh, whether they were justified. But I guess let me ask you the question: is the issue of Catalonian secession? Is this going to continue to crop up, no matter who wins in the elections in November? Is this going to be a continuing problem for Spain?
Well, this is a short question, but a very complex issue. In Spain, we have a very mature, a strong democracy, separation of powers. So I have to start by expressing my strong respect for the Supreme Court judgment. And being a part of the executive, I'm not going to comment on the sentence. We just abide by the judgments. We will implement that. That's what a public authority should do. Nobody should be above the law. So I will not comment on that. What I can nevertheless share some reflections. This is a process which has been building up for many years, so it will not be solved in a fortnight. But this judgment is an important phase in opening up a new era, a new process. No? In the last couple of years, we have seen high legal political uncertainty, also social tension between Catalans in the region, which I'm quite sure has had an impact, an economic impact. We have seen Catalonia growing less than the average of the rest of the country, whereas this used to be one of the most dynamic. So Spain has done very well. I think we would have done even better if we wouldn't have had this situation in Catalonia. What we want from the government's perspective, and we have been investing a lot of effort and patience in the last 16 months since we took office to try to calm down the situation, to put it on a constructive path, to engage in a dialogue within the law. That's what we hope that we will be able to continue to do, to move to this new phase with a more constructive environment where Catalans talk to Catalans, where the Catalan authorities represent the whole of society, not only the minority which wants secession from the rest of Spain. But you're right to relate it to Brexit, because I think that some of the underlying forces to this process are common to Brexit. And what we saw, for example, last night in the streets of Barcelona, we saw that violent groups were taking over the demonstrations on the streets. We saw fires. We saw images which were very much like the Gilets jaunes in Paris. So there is an unrest in the society which manifests itself in different manners. In the case of Spain, it has been channeled by the nationalistic forces to try to drive this secession process. But now that they see this is a dead-end street, I hope that we will be able to open a new, more constructive phase.
I mean, I'm not sure how it's playing within the current election campaign, but let me ask you just a little bit about this, the politics at the moment. So because of this this fragmentation and the gridlock. The government hasn't been able to pass a budget, really. It's had to kind of roll over budgets. I mean, what concerns you about the inability of being able to craft a singular budget each year with specific initiatives, specific investment plans, things like that? I mean, how does that worry you as an economist and who's trying to think a few years out, for Spain's competitiveness? What's the concern there with that?
Yes, since we took power, since we came to the government last June, we have been leading an economic policy on a three-pronged strategy. First, fiscal discipline. Second, social sensitivity. Listening to the people and trying to address their concerns on inequality, unfairness, etc. And third, structural reforms to put the economy on a stable path in the midterm. I'm sure we will have a chance to discuss these other two maybe, but on the first one, fiscal discipline, we need to continue on the path for deficit reduction and debt reduction, because one of the inheritances that we have from the crisis is a very high debt to GDP ratio. It was above 100% in 2014 of GDP, so we took as our top priority to reduce it as fast as possible. We would have liked to have passed a budget which would have allowed us to do this faster. Unfortunately, due to a surprising blockade, because it was the right-wing parties and the Catalan independentist parties got together to block the budget. These things happen. Well, we were not able to pass it, and that's why we had the first elections in the spring. We cannot do this so fast, but the commitment is very clear. So actually, our target this year is to have a deficit to GDP ratio of 2%. We will continue to go down next year, and we want to double the rhythm of reduction of the debt to GDP ratio. Since 2014 to 2017, we were able to go down by 2 percentage points. Now, we would like to have 4 percentage points in the coming 3 years. So
94%.
Yes, to be down to 95, 94% next year. We have sent to the European institutions a very detailed forecast with the numbers, and so this is without having the possibility to pass a budget. So this would be at a prolonged budget, because this is the current situation and we're some days before an election, so I cannot anticipate what will happen after November the 10th. Although you can imagine what I hope will happen very clearly. But as soon as the government is in place, we will send a revised budgetary plan to the European institutions, and I hope that we can even do better. But this shows that even within a politically constrained environment, we have done our utmost.
You have made some advances.
Absolutely. Yeah. The commitment is clear.
What about the economic reforms you sort of suggested? I mean, what would be your preferences if you could push forward? If your party gets a majority and you have a mandate, what would those economic reforms look like?
Yes, we have, this was one of the top priorities we had also when coming to office, which was to have a bit of a more strategic approach to the Spanish economy, because for many years there has been, I think that we have been lacking a clear plan, a pluriannual vision of where we want the country to go. And so we did a quite thorough exercise with the other ministries, with the competent ministries. Coordinating within a government is challenging, I'm sure you can imagine, so I'm very happy that we managed to have what we call an agenda for change, including a significant number of structural reforms, which come at no surprise. These are the recommended reforms by all international organisms and bodies. I'm talking about education and vocational training. I'm talking about R&D. I'm talking about facilitating businesses and integrating the Spanish market and allowing for firms to grow, seeing how to make these businesses to grow stronger. Also, the digitalization of the economy, the ecological transition. These are two top priorities for us. We have been following a quite ambitious approach to digitalization, for example, in terms of the deployment of infrastructures. Now the deployment of 5G technology. Spain is one of the most advanced countries in Europe, certainly, and we want to keep being at the vanguard of the digitalization process. And likewise for climate change. We are strongly committed to fighting climate change, and we think that this is a challenge but also an opportunity for the economy to transform itself and to find new opportunities opportunities for better quality jobs and more resilient businesses also.
I mean, one of the things that troubles many people about the Spanish economy is you have this growth that's been better than the rest of Europe for the most part. You've come out of the crisis better. You've fixed many of the problems that other countries haven't fixed, yet you still have a pretty stubborn sort of unemployment rate. It's stubbornly high. It's at around 14% and much higher for younger folks. What's as an economist, how do you diagnose that, and how would you propose to fix it?
Yes, this is indeed the most important challenge that we have in our country. I mean, the debt to GDP ratio is from the macro perspective visible, the second most visible imbalance that we have not been able to tackle in these 16 months in office. It has been a very short period, I have to say, is the unemployment rate. For the last 40 years, the different governments have tried to tackle this high unemployment, and the different reforms have somewhat been unable to tackle the duality that exists in the Spanish labor market, where you have part of the population have indefinite contracts, have a relatively safe job, and then there is a very significant share of the population, which is much higher than the EU average, of in particular young people, but not only young people, who have very short-term contracts, who have no security, very low wages, and have no prospect of having a career. This in turn leads to low investment in human capital, and therefore formation and the possibility for productivity of the economy to grow and potential output to increase. So that's why we are going to put so much effort, I hope, in the next 4 years to try to tackle this in a multi-pronged form. You know, it's not just one miracle solution that's going to do the trick. Many have tried. I hope that we can continue to have strong growth for time, and we can benefit from this growth phase to try to tackle it from a more structural perspective.
Right. Going back a bit to the fiscal question, you, despite some of these difficulties, the ratings agencies gave you a bit of a boost recently. I think you had a debt sale that was kind of, I guess, really went well. What's behind that? I mean, what is it that is this just a new, I don't know, a surge of Asian money that's come in? How do you guys kind of see the market response to Spain?
Well, I'm going to say, since we are here cozily by the fire and nobody's watching us, let me say, I think they should have upgraded Spain before. I mean, this upgrading came too late. We have been, for the last year, and I've done a number of meetings, many meetings with investors all around the world, and I kept getting this question: how comes the rating agencies have not upgraded you? Because the fundamentals of the Spanish economy were clearly much better than the agencies. But anyway, it's good. I think it was good that Standard & Poor's did upgrade us, and I hope others will also follow. And I think this was just reflecting the situation of the sovereign debt markets. The Spanish Treasury, the Secretary General for the Treasury is here with me, precisely to see some more investors in the course of this week. And what we have seen is a very strong interest in our debt, because we have a strong commitment to stability. There is a downward trend which is very clear. We have even used all possible margins to reduce issuance by 20 billion this year, so we are really committed to this, and so it's a relatively safe investment, which still, even though we have negative interest rates in the shorter terms, still may be interesting for investors to take. And indeed, what we have seen in the last year is that high quality, top quality investors are coming back to the Spanish Treasury market, which is obviously very good. We want stable investors to be with the Spanish kingdom.
Right.
The Kingdom of Spain.
Right. The negative yield's interesting. I mean, how do you, as a government, you know, one must be delighted to be able to be paid to borrow money. But I mean, if you look at it from an economist's perspective, what's your concern about what that does to corporate or investment or other behavior? I mean, are you concerned about what the long-term impact that will have?
No, it's a very good question, because there is, as many things in life, there are two sides to it. No, on the one hand, for us as an issuer of the sovereign, it's good that we're able to fund ourselves at negative rates, and the maturities at which we have negative rates are expanding. This is allowing us to reduce significantly the cost of debt, also to extend the maturity. So, from that point of view, I cannot complain. But from day one, when I became a minister, I publicly said, and in all the international meetings I have said, that I think we need to normalize monetary policy when, in particular, we were having strong growth rates and the Eurozone continues to grow. It's slowing down, but we have an environment which should allow us sooner or later to go back to a more normal environment in terms of monetary policy. But of course, again, I cannot comment on the ECB and the monetary policy authorities' decisions, because they are the ones responsible for setting the interest rates and deciding on monetary policy, and we have to abide and live with that.
Right. So let me ask you, you are not running for a seat in Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're the only cabinet minister doing that. I mean, just I'd love to get your, why is it you're not engaging in the political aspect of it? Of course, you're involved with the party, and as you said, you hope that the election has a clear result and you're thrown back into office. What is your philosophical view about not running as a politician?
Yeah. Well, I've been having mostly an international career as a technician, as an economist and a lawyer, and so in different until last June, when there was a motion of no confidence for the Spanish government due to corruption, and the new government came in and they called me to try to help with the situation, and so I felt the responsibility to try to help my country. I am very proud of having done that. I'm very satisfied of what we have achieved in these 16 months. I would really like to have a government with a 4-year prospect, which allows us to implement these reforms and to set Spain on an even stronger foot for the future, to live I'm going to be a bit romantic here, but to leave a better country for my children. No? This is an investment.
Which you have 4?
Well, my husband and I will have 4.
How you do that is another question.
Well, like any working mother, and I hope, and there are few, but a number around in the room, so it's challenging. But so I hope that we can continue in the government. I hope the Socialist Party wins. We're able to form a government soon, and we can have this stability. Because I really do think, even if I wasn't an active minister, I do think that that's what Spain needs right now, to have some stability so that we can look to the future with confidence and build on a stronger basis.
And so you would stay on
yes.
You would think in the new.
It depends on the president, of course.
Of course.
But
you serve at the pleasure of the president, or
yes, of course.
I guess. But what? Of course, the polls, though, right now, from what I can tell, are showing that we might be in a similar situation in November. Now everything can change, but what happens if we are in the same situation that we were in April, or more recently, where you have 4 or 5 or 6 parties, none of whom want to get together and compromise and agree on things? I mean, how should we read that possibility?
Well, I think the possibility is always there because, as you said, the political spectrum is quite fragmented. Actually, there are new political parties that will concur in the autumn that were not there in the spring even. So, but I also think the Spanish population is really very demanding of removal of the blockade, that we can move ahead and have a government as soon as possible. I hope that all the other parties behave responsibly and they facilitate a government, which they were not willing to do in the spring. They were probably hoping to have a better chance to have better results in the autumn. I don't know, but I would have hoped to have this in the spring. Okay, so be it. We work with what we have, but now the time has come for people to try to contribute in a positive manner to having a government as soon as possible, and I count on that responsibility and maturity. I
think it's, as you referenced before, I mean, Spain is going through what other countries are going through. France, for instance, is not in the middle of an election, but this, this disquiet among the voters in the political class is one of the, I mean, you're not a politician, so it makes you slightly an interesting creature in this situation, I suppose. Let's go back. Some of the things that Spain dealt with were like the banking industry is one that sort of, there does seem to be a lingering problem there, which is the government still owns a large stake in Bankia, which was the biggest bank that needed bailing out. Is there any prospect? I mean, I think probably the stake is underwater relative to the money that was put in at the time. What's the prospect for getting out of the banking industry for the Spanish government?
Yeah, Bankia is in a way the symbol of the crisis in Spain because of the size of the bank and because of the size of the investment, the capitalization that the public sector had to put into the bank, which actually, to a large extent, forced the Spanish government to even get a loan from the European authorities. So this was a European institutions. So this is indeed a symbol of the crisis. Right now, actually, the bank is run very professionally. We are quite satisfied with the way it's going. The different key performance indicators are very much aligned with the rest of the Spanish banking sector and the rest of the European banking sector. So, you know, our assessment is that the market valuation is clearly too low. It doesn't correspond at all to the intrinsic value of the bank. And anyway, it would not be a good business for the Spanish taxpayer if we would be privatizing it at such a low price. So we think that doing partial privatization, partial sellings, as was done in the past, doesn't make any sense, because the control premium would be lost, and therefore we're going to wait and see what the situation is after the elections, obviously, and then see the different options at stake. I mean, the objective should be to privatize it, but not at a significant loss for the Spanish taxpayers.
Right. How big a stake is it again?
Well, we have a majority stake in the bank right now.
Okay. And so as you say, a control premium would be if you just do it piecemeal and you don't want that. Yes,
the previous government, and I think, I don't criticize it, but they did small, you know, they sold small stakes to signal that they wanted to privatize it sooner or later. But when we got into the government, we saw that the market valuation was so low that it didn't make sense. I mean, our intention is to do it, but we will do it at the appropriate time and in the appropriate manner.
Right. I mean, I think the U.S. government sometimes has sold at a loss some of its stakes in banks, under the idea that we just don't want to be involved. You know, it's a little bit of a hit to taxpayer, but I mean, are you concerned that you'll ever be?
Well, this is absolutely run at arm's length basis. We're not on the management of the board. We're not members of I mean, this is a professional team that came from other banks that's doing a very good job with Bankia, and so it's from all points of view, it's like a private bank. It doesn't behave in any specific manner, but we do have that stake, and I have to defend the public interest, which is to get as high a price as possible for that.
You sound like a hedge fund manager.
No.
That's good. Well, your citizens will be happy. But let me ask you about the European Union. We've got a new commission, and you spent a lot of your career in Brussels. I mean, what hopes do you have, and what sort of specific requests does Spain have for going forward with the new commission? And I think we can be more specific. One of the France and Germany have talked about changing antitrust policy, for instance. Yet we have the same commissioner of antitrust, Margrethe Vestager, that would serve specific interests for France and Germany. For instance, the Alstom-Siemens merger. I mean, what are the sort of priorities for Spain in this new commission?
I may mention four. First is something that probably is not so much on your radar screen, but I think has been extremely important these last 4 years and will continue to be, is to have a coherent migration policy in Europe. To be sure that the fact that we do not have borders inside Europe means that we have clearly managed external borders. The migration pressure these last 4 years has been very intense and has actually provoked significant tensions between different member states, those that are in the Mediterranean front line, let's call it that way, and those that are maybe in the interior part of Europe and do not see it so close to them. So this is, I think, a top priority for Europe and a top priority for Spain. Obviously, we have a land border with Africa, so it's not only sea. Then the second very important issue, and I'm glad you mentioned it, is indeed how to modernize competition policy. We are not at all aligned with the approach that some member states that you mentioned have put on the table to be less pro-competition or pro-free markets. No, we think that competition policy is an important tool, that we need to reinforce it, that the objective should be to protect the well-functioning of markets and the welfare of citizens and consumers. But we certainly need to have a look at the system to update it to the reality of the 21st century. A third area which is going to be extremely important, I think, is digitalization. Now, it's interesting that Margrethe Vestager has been put on top of competition policy and digitalization. That obviously, that's a third challenge that we need to find, the way forward on that one.
And where do you, just to remind me where Spain stands on the issue of a digital tax?
We think that we need to have an international order which is fair and that does tax all activities, including those that did not exist when we designed our system. So we're very strongly cooperating with the OECD. We will be seeing later this week the report from the OECD, from Ángel Gurría. We will be seeing how to make progress in the G20. We have strongly supported a European digital tax. We have been indicating that if there is no international solution, we will have to do it nationally, as other countries have signaled. It cannot be.
There wasn't one passed through the Spanish Parliament, was
there? It didn't pass, but we had the proposal was ready. It's just that due to the fact that the mandate finished. So I do think there is a need to address this at the global level. And well, the signs we got were encouraging. Let's see later this week what we hear in Washington. I hope that there will be progress, and we strongly support this process. And then if you allow me, a fourth area which is interesting for Europe is the whole fiscal environment. We have been leading our fiscal policies, and the coordination of fiscal policies, in particular within the Eurozone, is based on a very complex set of rules. There is wide agreement that we need to simplify them, to focus on more observable variables, and also to reinforce the coordination of fiscal policy, to build even a Eurozone budget, in a way to be more similar to the US, which does have a federal budget corresponding to the federal currency, to the dollar. And we have the euro, but it doesn't have the same kind of instruments. So this fourth area, I think, is also going to be very important going forward.
That fourth one will be real tough to get the Germans and the Dutch and other folks to agree on, I'm afraid. But I mean, I guess that would make it more like a United States of Europe in the sense that you'd have a tax and transfer system. But that'll be a tough one. Before we go to questions, so formulate your questions. Your name came up recently when they were looking for a new head of the IMF, and I'm just curious what what you thought of that and what interest you might have had in that role.
Mm-hmm. Well, the name was proposed by other countries, and the President Sanchez thought that it was indeed a good opportunity for Spain, and obviously for me personally, to have this very important position. The moment the name of Kristalina Georgieva came up, we've been colleagues, we're very good friends. I could only be happy that she would be the candidate, and she has been the new managing director. We will have her first performances this week. So then it became quite clear that this was a good way out. But being in the process and having been a possible candidate, is an honor, obviously, that I'm very happy with.
All right. And you lived in Washington at some point?
No.
No, okay.
No.
Because you sound like an American with your
do
accent.
I?
Yeah, it's
okay.
It's pretty good. I'm wondering how that happened.
Okay.
And I've heard you're French, and it's also
yes.
ridiculously good. Yeah, very good. And your Spanish, by the way, is really excellent. So look, if anyone has a question for the minister, raise your hand, and then we will get a microphone to you. Sure, over here, Kristen. Just to identify yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Connor Hazley from Ergo Global Intelligence. So, Minister, many have questioned the reliability of output gap estimates by pointing out that, according to the European Commission, for example, the output gaps in Germany and Italy are the same, despite Germany's having more than 10% greater economic performance than Italy over the past decade. Moreover, output gap estimates diverge substantially between the European Commission, the OECD, and the IMF. So my question is, do you believe that current output gap measurements sufficiently distinguish between cyclical and structural economic conditions such that they should inform the structural budget balance estimates and in turn EU fiscal rules?
The short answer is no. The long answer is that we have been actually questioning for the last 16 months. We sent a specific piece to the European Commission last time in spring, in the autumn and in spring, showing that actually the methodology had got it always wrong in the case of Spain, in particular when there's a change in the sign of the cycle. So no, this is one of the shortcomings that we have with the European fiscal discipline, which is that the rules are based on non-observable variables, which maybe are not so easy to calculate. I was even reflecting, now that we got the Spanish Statistical Office, I mentioned it before, they have revised the GDP series over the last 23 years. Not only the GDP series, but also the components. So we have to see what impact that has on the output gap calculations and the structural output. The endogeneity, I don't want to get too technical, but the endogeneity of potential output is one of the shortcomings of the system. So I think these are the rules, we apply them, but I think we can do maybe better in the future and with something simpler and more observable and therefore controllable.
Good question. Over here to the right. Wait for the mic, and if you don't mind.
I just wanted to ride on to two of Rob's points that he already made. The first one, he opened up talking about Brexit. You are importing or exporting twice as much to the UK as you are importing. About a third of that is in motor vehicles, inclusive of airplanes and helicopters and associated parts. That's a big chunk. And then about 25% is agriculture. If that goes hard, how do you see that playing out for Spain? And then a similar question that Rob had about the ECB. You sort of dodged that because you're not a member of the ECB governing board, but from your perspective in Spain, there's a lot of conversation going on, including this week, about the distortions the ECB is causing for economies because individual countries aren't average. And Rob's already pointed that out. How do you see the distortions, most helping or hurting Spain from, an investor perspective? What should we look at?
Yes, with regards to the, I was thinking of the ECB. Your first question was about Brexit, yes. So on Brexit, yes, I mentioned the issue of agro-food because this is one which obviously is very directly disrupted if there is a delay in transportation. But the other area of concern is, of course, the industrial sector, where the global value chains are going to be disrupted, and car manufacturing, we have car plants in Spain where the motors are made in the UK or vice versa. I think companies have prepared for that, to be frank. The large companies have prepared for the temporary distortion that disruption that could take place. We have seen companies hoarding inputs and goods to avoid this kind of situation, but beyond the transitory disruption, it will be important to see what the structural impact could be of a non-agreed Brexit at the end of the day, which I hope is not the outcome at all. We will need to see when the process moves to the next phase how to ensure that we continue to have the same efficiencies and synergies with the new scenario, which is right now quite difficult to predict, to be frank. Then on the ECB, yes, there is a lot of debate. I think that at the end of the day, it's the wisdom of the persons that are in the ECB, and we have to trust them. They're independent, so it's their decision. Indeed, the fact that we have low or even negative interest rates for such a long period of time obviously does have an impact on savings, on investment, on the banking sector and the insurance sector. So far, the financial sector in Spain is coping quite well. They are continuing with the same kind of performance indicators. The market valuations are low. We have just discussed it for Bankia, but it's the same for the whole banking sector. We think they are too low, but they're quite low across the whole EU. Whether the negative interest rates may have an impact on that, some consider that it may be the case. But in any case, now we will have Madame Lagarde taking over. It's a new phase that opens, and we will have to see in any case, how to better articulate fiscal policy and monetary policy, because I think there is a unanimous agreement that when we are in this kind of environment, monetary policy doesn't have so much space further, so much impact. The marginal impact of decisions is smaller. And we need to see how to articulate the two better. I haven't heard anybody disagreeing with this, actually.
Other back.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. You'd mentioned 5G, and I just wanted to ask what the role of Huawei is in that, and whether you think whether the U.S. sanctions have any impact or problematize it in any way. And also this case of Hugo Carvajal. I don't know if I know that there's a request by the U.S. to extradite an individual from Venezuela for money laundering and narco trafficking, and I'm just wondering, is it on your radar? Can you say anything about the potential economic impact of this standoff about extradition on money laundering charges? Thanks.
Well, on the first issue on 5G, in Spain we have one of the tightest, or how to say, deepest networks of high-speed networks in our country. Throughout decades, there's been a very strong investment, and so we have a very good digital, physical also, but remarkably in this case, digital infrastructure. We want to build on this so that we're also in the vanguard when it comes to 5G. So we are on track to the auctioning of the spectrum for the mobile operators to be able to deploy the 5G networks. We are supporting pilot projects to see real live experiments. We're going to launch now the second wave of pilot projects to start to see how this technology would work in the future. We're very strongly supporting international cooperation in this area, also ethical and human-centric development of the new technology. So we want to play an important role in this regard. When it comes to security, we need to ensure security of the networks. So we have also been contributing very actively to the process launched by the European Commission to identify possible risks, possible shortcomings in our security systems, and see how to address those potential weaknesses, cybersecurity risks. I would invite you to see the report which was published 1 or 2 weeks ago by the European Commission, which is the first phase in this diagnosis process to see whether other measures will need to be taken. I will not make any remarks on an individual situation, of course.
Margaret, with all the way back there.
Margaret Popper, I'm with Sard Verbinnen. I was wondering, there's been this body of discourse around the North-South divide in the Eurozone and where the power resides. And I wanted to pick up a little bit on something that Rob had alluded to, which is the power of Germany in the whole constellation and what that does to economies like Spain. How do you see that power divide evolving, and what's Spain's role in that?
Well, first of all, I try to avoid north-south divides, east-west, rich, poor, or euro, non-euro, because the European Union needs to be built on the basis of a very complex kind of geometry, and it's not so easy, you know. On some issues, I am quite aligned with the Netherlands, Spain, not I personally. Spain is aligned to the Netherlands. On some other issues, we are not at all, no? And this may happen in many different instances. And so from the perspective of Spain, we have not supported this kind of creating blockades or barriers or groups or clubs. We want to be integrating. I think Spain, as I mean, now the fourth but largest economy, and an important pro-European society, I think that we have a strong role to play, and we have been playing this role in the last 16 months also the fact that we have a president who is very comfortable in the international environment, speaks languages, can you know, this facilitates the fact that Spain is in a way back on the international arena, and in particular in Europe. And I think that this is good, because it does create a different kind of motor to the integration process, which is not only the Franco-German friendship, which of course is very important, but Spain, and now that Italy is also back on a different track, I think that we can all play an important role in leading the process going forward.
But how do you get the Germans to spend more money?
Well, actually, the German finance minister, he's a good friend, and he has been trying to put forward, and he has managed to push through, not yet implemented, but on track, a quite ambitious program of investments having to do with climate change in Germany. They really see that the car manufacturing industry, others too, but the car manufacturing industry, which has suffered for most directly this trade slowdown, they see that they need to invest heavily in infrastructures and in some industries to do this transition. And I am happy that there is this more forward-looking approach. Also, the Netherlands, by the way, have announced that they will have a very ambitious investment program going forward, also very much focused on green economy. So there seems to be momentum for this Green New Deal and for having important investments taking place, which we very strongly support from the Spanish point of view.
One more question. Go ahead. Yeah, there you are. Yeah. Here.
Just curious to hear your thoughts on the role that's played in Europe by the American tech giants, like Facebook and Google. Are they playing a role in Europe that's good or bad, and what's your stance?
Well, this one I cannot reply with a simple yes, no, good or bad. No, I think that the technological change and the new services and the transformation which the large platforms are bringing to our economy has fantastic assets and advantages and prospects for the future, which we want to embrace. At the same time, we need to adjust our systems to this new reality. It has to do with the competition policy. It has to do with the taxation system. We discussed it just now. It has to do with labor policy, for example. We have recently seen a number of judgments which have to do with the role of the riders that run around the city on the bike to distribute food. Are they self-employed persons? Are they employees of a company? This shows that there are tensions between the systems that we have had for the last century and the new reality that these tech giants may impose. And so we need to adjust the system. I wouldn't say it's good or bad. There are good and bad elements. We need to make the most of it.
Okay, before we break, I have one question for you. So, as you know, I lived in Paris last year, and I'm shopping for a new place to live. Let's say I'm work in the financial services. I'm sort of being hypothetical, but also slightly personal. Why would I go to Madrid?
Oh, definitely.
Give me your pitch.
Well, actually,
sort of a post-Brexit pitch.
No, but a number of companies are coming, not only or not so much from the financial sector, but for example, from the broadcasting and input producing. I mean, you may have seen Netflix has established their production bases in Madrid. And so I can reply with empirical evidence. It's not what I think, but why are they coming here? Why are they coming there to Spain, and in particular to Madrid, but the whole of Spain? First, the quality of life is outstanding. I mean, you can live very well. It's the weather, it's the food, it's the housing, it's the prices. So you can have an excellent quality of life. You're very close to Paris, London, Rome, wherever. So it's very well connected. Excellent infrastructures, excellent digital infrastructures. And also you have an ecosystem of people who are very well prepared. So they were telling me you have, in the case of the broadcasting industry, you have script writers and producers and actors and you have studios that you can rent and all the infrastructure. So you have an ecosystem which is very favorable to these kind of businesses growing. We are also seeing a number of the tech giants actually also establishing in Spain, sort of moving some of their research centers to Spain for similar reasons. And so the financial industry, of course, you would have the same kind of advantages in that sense. Right. I'm not going to, go any further because we don't want everybody moving to Madrid and then the prices going up enormously. But you should look into that.
Okay. Well, on that On that note, thank you very much. Please give a warm welcome. Thank you to our guest. Good luck in the IMF this week.
Okay, thank you very
Bye.
much. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.